All right, we said that the price searchers face a downward sloping demand curve, which means they cut their price, they can sell more. Okay? Let's consider an example. So you're given this demand schedule. We'll go through this in terms of numbers, and then we'll go through the graph for it. A price searcher who we're told if he charges $7 per unit, he can sell 1 unit. If he charges $6 per unit, he can sell 2. If he charges $5 per unit, he can sell 3. If he charges 4 per unit, he can sell 4. If he charges only 3, and he can sell 5. So this is our hypothetical demand curve. How do we find the firm's marginal revenue curve? Or column. What's marginal revenue defined as?
Change in total revenue.
Yes, exactly. Change in total revenue over the change in quantity. It's the extra revenue the firm gets from selling an extra unit. Okay? So, to calculate marginal revenue, we got to know what total revenue is. And we know total revenue is just the quantity the firm produces and sells multiplied by the price per unit. Okay? So we need to put up a total revenue column here. If he wants to sell 1 unit, the highest price he can charge is $7. So his total revenue is going to be the price times the quantity. It's going to be 7. If he wants to sell 2, what does he have to do? Has to cut the price to $6. Now, we're going to make a really important assumption here, and we will do this in everything we do. Okay? And that is that the producer has to pick a price, and then he sells all that he wants to sell at that price. Okay? We are not going to consider situations where the firm can price discriminate. There are many situations in which a firm can price discriminate. When you discriminate, what are you doing? Sometimes. But if I look at the wall and I say I can discriminate between the color of the board and the color of the wall, I'm saying I can tell there's a difference, and I can tell a difference. I can make a difference. With price discrimination, the firm is charging different prices to different customers or for different units. Consider this demand curve. If you're the producer, what would you like to do? Charge the most you can for each and every unit. This demand curve is saying there's somebody who's willing to pay $7 for that first unit. There's somebody who's willing to pay $6 for the second, and $5 for the third, fourth, so on. So what the producer would like to do, if he had perfect information and as the consumers come in, if he could somehow read their mind and know the most they're willing to produce, he would like to charge that first consumer $7. But then for the guy who's only willing to pay $6, he'd like to charge him $6. For the person who's only willing to pay $4, he'd like to charge them $4. That's what a firm that can price discriminate charges different prices to different customers and for different units. And if they can do that, that can greatly increase their profit. But we're not going to have time to talk about that because that gets more complicated. So we will not be considering that. We will be considering only a situation where the firm chooses one price, and then they have to sell all that they sell at that price. Okay? So if the firm wants to sell the second unit, that means he has to lower his price on all of the units to $6. So if he charges $6 per unit and sells 2, his total revenue is $12. If he wants to sell 3, what does he have to do? Got to cut his price to 5. And if he sells at a price of $5 per unit and sells 3 units, he gets $15 in total. If he wants to sell 4, he's got to cut his price to 4. If he sells 4 at $4 a piece, he brings in $16. If he wants to sell 5, got to cut his price to 3. 3 times 5 is 15. Okay? Everybody got that? Now, marginal revenue. What is it? It's the extra revenue the firm gets from selling an extra unit of the product. What's the marginal revenue from selling the first unit? 7. Because if he didn't sell anything, total revenue would be 0. So when he sells the first unit, revenue goes from 0 to 7. The change in revenue is $7. Here's where it may seem strange. What's the marginal revenue from selling a second unit? 5. Because his revenue goes from 7 to 12. Now, you're probably thinking, but when he sells that second unit, he's getting $6 from the customer who buys it. So why isn't his revenue, marginal revenue, $6 on the second unit? Because that's right, he sold the first unit for less. In order to sell the second unit, he had to cut his price. And so in order to sell that second unit, he is losing $1 on the first unit because he cut his price by $1. But now he's selling a unit he wasn't selling before, and he's getting $6 on it. So his marginal revenue from selling that second unit is 5. Okay. Notice something key for price searcher markets: marginal revenue will be less than the price. In the price taker market, the thing that made it relatively simple was marginal revenue and price were exactly the same thing. But now that we've moved to price searcher markets, marginal revenue and price are not going to be the same. And marginal revenue is always going to be below the price, as we'll see in a second. Sorry?
Or equal to? Like on the first?
For the very first unit, it will be equal. But for every other unit, it's going to be less. Okay. Third unit, let's think through each one of these carefully. When he decides to sell the third unit, total revenue goes from 12 to 15. Marginal revenue, the change is $3. But he got $5 when he sold that third unit.
He's selling each unit for $5?
Sorry?
Is he selling each unit for $5?
That's right. See, we're assuming that he has to pick a price. And he sells all that he's going to sell at that price. Okay? If he's charging different prices, that would be price discrimination, and he would love to do that, and sometimes he can. But to keep it simple, we're not going to deal with those. Okay? So he picks a price, he then sells to whoever wants to buy from him at that price. Question?
Yeah, how come it wouldn't be going from the very first entry as opposed to the one above it? Because you're subtracting 15 from 12 and getting the 3. Wouldn't it be really 21 minus 15 and be $6? Because you're selling the original first item for $7 a piece. You see what I mean?
Where are you getting 21?
Well, I'm saying if you sold 3 at the original price, $7, it would be $21.
But you can't.
No,
Because that's the thing, you can't sell
The revenue
3
you get from
if you charge.
selling an additional
It's a marginal revenue is dealing with if you sell 1 extra unit, what happens to total revenue? Okay. So all the information you need is right here. If you decide to sell that first unit, you get $7 on it. You weren't selling anything so your revenue goes up by 7. If you decide to sell the second unit, well, in order to sell it, you've got to cut your price for all of your customers. Okay? So when you cut the price to 6, now you do get 6 from selling the second, but you had to cut the price on the first from 7 to 6, so you lost $1. So you're gaining 6, losing 1. That's why margin revenue was only 5. If you decide to sell a third, you've got to cut your price from $6 down to 5. Okay? Because you're now selling that third unit, you do get $5 from selling that third unit, but in order to sell it, you had to cut the price on the first 2 by an extra $1. Okay? So you're gaining 5 from the sale of the third unit, but you're losing $2 on each, or you're losing $1 on each of the first 2 that you could have sold at 6. So your margin revenue is 5 minus 2, which is 3. If you decide you want to sell a fourth unit, okay, what do you have to do?
Decrease by $1 again.
You have to cut your price from $5 to $4. And by doing that, you now do get to sell that fourth unit. And the customer who buys that fourth unit is going to pay you $4. But in order to sell the fourth unit, you cut your price on the first 3 units from 5 to 4. So you're cutting your price by $1 on the first 3 units. So your margin revenue is 4 minus 3, which is 1. And you can see total revenue did go from 15 to 16. Even though your price for that fourth unit is 4, the extra revenue you're getting is only 1. And now look at the fifth. If you decide to sell the fifth, you have to cut your price to $3. Okay? When you sell that fifth unit, it will add, or you get $3 from the consumer who bought that fifth unit. But in order to sell it, you had to cut your price on the first 4. You could have sold them for 4. You had to cut the price by $1. So you're losing $1 on the first 4 units. You're gaining $3 by selling an extra one. The change in total revenue then is minus $1. And that's exactly the change we see here. It goes from, total revenue goes from 16 to 15. So margin revenue is negative. Okay? Why are we doing this? We're trying to find what is the quantity that will give the firm maximum profit, and that quantity is where MR equals MC. We have now found the marginal revenue schedule. Let's now look at what this is going to look like graphically. Leave some space there. We've got a downward sloping demand curve. What's the marginal revenue schedule going to look? What's the curve going to look like? For price takers, go back to price takers. The demand curve and the marginal revenue curve were the same thing. Okay? And marginal revenue was equal to the price. That was price takers. Is this going to be the marginal revenue curve? For the first unit, price and margin revenue are equal. Okay? So the margin revenue curve is going to start out right here. Okay? But notice the way, using the numbers that I have here, every time the quantity goes up by 1, the price goes down by $1. Okay? But what happened to margin revenue?
It goes in by $2.
Goes down by $2, which means the marginal revenue curve is going to be steeper than the demand curve. The marginal revenue is falling faster than the price. Notice for every unit after the first one, price is greater than marginal revenue. And the more you produce, the greater that difference is going to be. So as we start from 0 and move in this direction, the price is going down and the marginal revenue is going down. Okay? But marginal revenue is going down faster, and the marginal revenue is always going to be below the demand curve. And just to give you an easy way to draw the curve correctly, if you take the origin, you take the endpoint for the demand curve, find the midpoint. Right? That's where the marginal revenue curve is going to go through, or that's where it's going to cut the axis. We won't go into why that's true, but if you do that, if you run it through that point, then you will be drawing the curve correctly, which means the marginal revenue curve starts here. It's going to go through there. So it's going to look something like that. It should be a straight line there. Okay. The demand curve is negatively sloped. The marginal revenue curve is negatively sloped and steeper. They're starting out at the same point. The marginal revenue curve is going to be steeper. Okay, and you'll see this in for all the exhibits in chapter 23. Okay, wherever the demand curve is, just take the midpoint between here and here. That's where the marginal revenue curve is going to come through. So if you draw it like that, you will be drawing your curve correctly. Okay. Notice no matter what quantity you pick, if you read up to the demand curve, that's going to give you the price that he can charge. And if you read up to the marginal revenue curve, that's going to give you the firm's marginal revenue for that quantity. No matter what quantity you pick, notice the price that you're getting off of the demand curve is going to be greater than marginal revenue, which you're going to get off of the marginal revenue curve. Okay, that is consistent with what we have over here. For every level of output after the first, marginal revenue is going to be below the price. Okay, so all we've done here is take basically our numbers from here and show what the MR curve is going to look like. The goal is to answer the question, what price is the firm going to charge, and what quantity is the firm going to produce? And all we have to do to answer both of those questions is to ask, where is marginal revenue, marginal cost going to be equal? Okay? All we have to do. The graphs can look really, really complicated. You just have to remember, it doesn't matter how complicated the graph is. The ideas are very simple, and you just go through it one step at a time. Let me draw a new graph, show you how to do that. Demand curve. Of course, demand curve won't always be straight, but it makes it a little easier to draw it straight. So doing that, where's the marginal revenue? Start up here, find the midpoint, or estimate the midpoint. You know, the marginal revenue curve is going to go through that point. Notice once you go beyond this quantity, once you get out here, okay, that would correspond to something like this. Because once you go beyond this point, the marginal revenue is negative. Okay. Just as once you go beyond 4, when you produce the 5th unit, you're still getting a positive price when you sell that 5th unit. But what's happening to your total revenue? It's going down. Well, it's not just that you're losing money. See, we haven't shown profit up here yet. We're simply trying to figure out which is the unit, what quantity should the firm produce in order to make maximum profit. Where MR is equal to MC. So if you were given this and asked where's maximum profit, you would say, I have no idea, because all I have is demand and marginal revenue. To find the profit maximizing quantity, I need to know marginal cost. Okay? And we know marginal cost is going to look something like that. Okay? And of course, there's going to be an average total cost, there's going to be average variable cost. I'll leave those out for now. Okay? First thing you do is figure out what quantity to produce, where is that going to be, the ideal quantity, where MR and MC are equal. So it doesn't matter how complicated the graph looks, you can find the MR curve, and you can find the MC curve, and you can find where they intersect. Okay? Here's marginal revenue, here's marginal cost. That's where they intersect. Okay? You put a big dot there. Okay? And then you remind yourself that nothing, now that you know that quantity, you read down to the horizontal axis, and that tells you the quantity that will give maximum profit. Okay? That's where MR and MC are equal. Okay? And then you tell yourself nothing is relevant except what we find along that vertical line. Okay? Now that we know that if he's going to produce this quantity, then everything else is relevant. If he's producing more, well, we don't care. If he's producing less, we don't care. He's going to produce this quantity. Okay? So all you do is look at that vertical line. Okay? If he wants to produce this quantity, what price is he going to charge? Is he going to charge a price shown here? No. I'll warn you, this is the mistake people often make. They get that intersection is really important. And so they say, well, that's the price he'll charge. No. That is where marginal revenue and marginal cost are equal. Okay? This gives you his marginal revenue. It doesn't tell you the price that he's going to charge. Okay? He wants to sell this quantity. He's going to charge the highest price that he can charge and still sell that quantity. And how do we find that highest price? Given the information we have here.
Maybe the intersection of the demand.
Exactly. Read up to the demand curve. And then you read over. What is that point showing you? It's showing you the quantity consumers will be willing to buy if he charges that price. Okay. Now, would he prefer to charge $1 million per unit?
Yes.
Sure. Okay. But the demand curve shows you how much he will be able to sell at each price. Once you know that this is the quantity that will give him maximum profit, then you say, well, I know he wants to charge the highest price he can charge and still sell that quantity. And the highest price he can charge and sell that quantity is the price you find from reading to the demand curve. Okay. So what's he going to do? He's going to produce Q star units. He's going to charge a price of P star. How did we find those? First step, find where MR and MC are equal. Read down to the axis, and that gives you the quantity. Read up to the demand curve, read over, that gives you the price. Okay? By charging this price and producing this quantity and selling that quantity, he's going to get the highest profit that he can possibly make. Okay? Now,